What's up, everybody? Coach Daisha here, bringing you this week's hot topic. This is one where I didn't know if it would be a hot topic or not. I didn't know if I would get enough questions about this to actually address it. It happens to be something that I have addressed so many times in the past with weight loss clients, but haven't necessarily dealt with it a lot with people with osteoporosis or osteopenia. However, I did get the question here recently, and I thought it'd be a good time to actually address this because there are ways of actually tracking your body measurements that are beneficial on a bone health journey. So that's what today's hot topic is all about. Are what are the best ways and what are the best numbers that we can actually look at from a body measurement standpoint to make sure we're on the right track. So let's go. So the first thing that I want to address is your weight and getting that one number when you step on a scale. That number I have really found over the years as a coach to be very problematic for a lot of people, especially women who are on a weight loss journey. That number can be very triggering. It can make us extremely happy if it's going the way we want it to, and can make us very depressed if it's going in the opposite direction. So the first thing that I want to talk about when you see one number on a scale, your weight, is to consider this. That number encompasses all of you. All of you. It is not just body fat, which is what most people are trying to lose. If you're trying to lose weight, you're not trying to lose muscle, you're not trying to lose water or anything like that. You're trying to lose adipose tissue, aka body fat. However, that is just a small portion of what encompasses all of you. So when you step on a scale and you see one number, that's not just body fat that's going up or down. That could also be muscle. That could also be water weight. That can be everything else that makes you up, right? Skin, internal organs, your skeletal system, etc., etc. However, unfortunately, a lot of people don't see that. They don't stop to think about that one number, weight, encompasses everything that makes a human being physically. So, the first thing that I want to tell somebody who's on a bone health journey, you're trying to improve bone health. Don't worry about the weight. Don't worry about your weight number. There are other parameters that you really want to pay attention to, and some of them can be found on a scale. So let's talk about the type of scale that you want to get that's going to help you actually track meaningful progress. If you're ready to track body measurements using a scale, it's time to upgrade your scale and make sure you have a scale that uses bioelectrical impedance. Now, that is a long, very hard to say phrase for most people. But if you ever see a scale that says BIA, or a lot of times you'll see them referenced as either a smart scale or a body fat scale, that's the type of scale that we're talking about today. These are extremely common now. You can find them at any local store, and of course you can order them online. What happens with a bioelectrical impedance scale is that once you step on it barefoot, it sends a signal up one foot, up that leg, into your midsection, and down the other leg. Very imperceptible. You cannot feel it whatsoever, but that's what's happening. That signal is going through and is making a determination. How easily it got through there means that you're probably well hydrated and probably have a lot of lean muscle mass. If it had a hard time going through that section of your body, then it's going to assume that you have a higher percentage of body fat. So that particular scale is actually going to give you a lot more information than just your weight. Of course, your weight is one of the numbers, but it gives you so many things. And depending on the type of scale you get, you could probably get upwards of 12 different numbers or things that it can track based on that one time that you stand on the scale. So what I would like to do right now is to actually tell you the 3 most important numbers to pay attention to on a BIA scale so you know and can understand how to properly track your progress. So the first number that I want you to start to track on a body fat scale is body fat percentage. Instead of paying attention to weight, what you really want to know is how much of my body right now is composed of adipose tissue, aka body fat. The best way to know that is going to be body fat percentage. And this is simply a number that is taking how much body fat you have on your body in relation to your overall weight. Now, you simply track this number over weeks, over months, etc., and you want to see trends in that number. Is that number trending up? Is it trending down, etc.? Now, what will normally happen is as we start to build more lean muscle mass, we will start to also see our body fat percentage go down. So you want to kind of see those numbers do that correlation. But you can't do that if you're not actually tracking body fat percentage. So if you're on a body fat scale, that's going to be the number one number that you track first is your body fat percentage. The second number I just already talked about. If we're already tracking body fat percentage, we also want to track our muscle mass. And this can be tracked by the number, the lean body mass number, or some scales will call it your skeletal muscle mass. Either way, find that number and start tracking that number, because as you progress in your strength training routine, you want to see that number going up. You don't want to see it coming down. Unfortunately, for a lot of people who don't consume enough calories throughout the day and do more workout and expend more calories than they actually consume, one of the unfortunate parts of this is that instead of your body starting to utilize energy from its body fat stores, it will sometimes take that energy from your muscle stores instead. So you could be under eating and unfortunately losing muscle mass. So you do want to track this number. As I mentioned before, as you start to see the muscle mass number go up, you will probably also see the body fat percentage number come down. They're almost directly correlated if you are properly hydrated, eating well, and following your fitness routine. So that's the second number that you want to track, your skeletal muscle mass or lean muscle mass. And last but not least, the number that's going to help you from a nutrition standpoint is going to be your BMR. That stands for your basal metabolic rate. Fancy way of saying how many calories your body needs on a daily basis just to keep you alive. So imagine that you got to lie in your bed for 24 hours and do absolutely nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. You don't get up, you don't eat, you do nothing. You were to lie down for 24 hours. Well, even in that state, your body needs a minimum amount of calories to keep you alive. So that is what your basal metabolic rate represents. We use that number to help you then determine what would be the proper amount of calories for you to consume on a regular basis to keep you healthy. So, as you are on your strength training journey and you're building more lean muscle mass, guess what's going to happen to your overall weight number? That number is actually going to go up. That's why just focusing on weight is not a good thing, because you could be building muscle mass and yet your weight's going up and you think you're doing something wrong. You're not doing anything wrong whatsoever. Muscle mass is still simply going up. Always keep in mind, muscle is more dense than fat. So that means that you don't need as much muscle mass to also equal the same amount of weight as you would for fat. So you've probably seen that graphic before where you see on a table, you see what represents 1 pound of muscle and 1 pound of fat. And you normally see how big that fat, the depiction of fat is, right? It's pretty large compared to the little bitty muscle one. Well, that's exactly what happens in the human body. You don't need much muscle to equal that same pound. But as you start to gain more muscle, guess what would happen to your overall weight? It would go up. Well, with that said, basal metabolic rate, the equation to actually determine that, has your weight in there. The other factors don't change that often. Your gender doesn't really change, right? Your height doesn't change that often. We're pretty much the same height. I know we get a little shorter as we age, but we're pretty much the same height. And then your age, that only changes once a year. The fourth parameter for determining your BMR is your weight. And because your weight is going to start to fluctuate as you gain more muscle mass, that means your BMR is going to change. And this is important. As your BMR changes and goes up with your weight, you want to then adjust your diet and your nutrition to counteract that, right? We want to make sure that we are eating enough calories. If you don't eat enough, if you underconsume, your body will start to, once again, use lean muscle mass as an energy source. We don't want it to do that. We want to keep that lean muscle mass. We want it to use carbohydrate stores instead. Maybe even a little bit of that adipose tissue if we've got some left over. We want it to use that as an energy source and not muscle. But the only way to do that is to make sure that you consume enough. So when you step on a BIA scale, One of the numbers it's going to give you is going to be your BMR. You want to make sure that you're eating your BMR plus a few hundred extra calories each day to account for your exercise and your activities of daily living. So track your BMR. As it goes up, make sure you're consuming enough calories to account for that. Now, using a BIA or body fat scale is just one way that you can track your body measurements to see if not only what you're doing from a strength training standpoint is helping, but everything else, nutrition, supplements, etc. One of the ways that you can do this is by doing circumference measurements. So taking a small tape measure and doing circumference measurements in certain areas. You can do your bust line, you can do waist, you can do hips, you can do each arm in the midsection near your bicep. You can also do each thigh in the middle of your thigh. These are just several of the areas that you can measure and track over time to see that your strength training regimen is helping. Another way, outside of circumference measurements, is to take pictures. We call these progress pictures. Doesn't really matter what you call it. Simply take pictures of yourself. Here's the deal. You see yourself on a daily basis in the mirror, so it's hard for you to see those changes happening over time. This is why when you run into somebody who hasn't seen you in a long time and they look at you and they go, "Oh, wow, you look great," or "You lost some weight," or whatever it is that they say to you, they're comparing you to the last time they saw you, which could have been weeks, months, maybe even years ago. But you're seeing yourself every single day. And that's what we call that extremely slow progress when you're looking at yourself every day. Take those progress pictures maybe once a month, every other month, and you can start to compare there and see how you're progressing in your daily routines. Last but not least is clothing. Use your clothing as a way to track body measurements. Now, if you're somebody who likes to wear very loose clothing in the first place, this might not be the best one to use, but there is one little area that we can all use when it comes to clothing to help us track progress, and that's going to be our waist, right? That's going to be the elastic band or being able to zip in and button up our pants, etc. And that's simply because that area is normally tight. You could probably be loose anywhere else, but in order for pants to stay up on our body, they're got to have some type of waistband. So with that said, that could be one way that you can track no matter how the rest of your clothing fits. Now, to go back to the scale, there are some contraindications when it comes to a body fat scale. Once again, I said at the beginning, it uses this really small, imperceptible electrical signal. Because of that, it can interfere with things like pacemakers, defibrillators, etc. So if you have any of those installed, you will find that most manufacturers of those scales are going to tell you not to use that scale. It's also contraindicated for pregnant women. I know I don't deal with that so much with the osteo community, but I like to put that out there. There are other conditions, especially if you've got edema, swelling, things like that, where it's not necessarily that it's contraindicated, it's simply that it's going to give you a really skewed result. This is why if you are going to use that BIA scale, you want to make sure that you are properly hydrated, right? You don't want to be overhydrated, because if you're overhydrated, it's actually going to skew your numbers in the positive. It's going to make you seem like you've got way more muscle mass on you than you do have. However, the opposite is also true. If you're dehydrated and you use that scale, it is going to skew your numbers in a more negative light. It's going to make it seem like you've got more body fat on your frame than you do. So being properly hydrated is very, very important. With that said, if you have a condition where you have edema and things like that, the scale is simply going to skew your numbers. Now, with all of these different ways to measure your body, whether it's the scale, the circumference, the pictures, etc., I do have a couple of tips on how to do this. Now, when do you use the scale? When do you take these circumference measurements, etc.? I want you to pick one day of the week, just one. It can be Sunday, it can be Thursday, I don't care, but you pick one day of the week and you never measure outside of that day. Now, when do you do it? You're going to do it first thing in the morning, right after you go to the bathroom, and then you're going to take all of your clothes off. You're going to make sure that you're naked. You don't want the clothing or the weight of your clothing to skew the numbers once you step on the scale. What this also does, if you weigh yourself, if you're using the scale and you're only doing it weekly, this really allows you to see true progress, whether it's body fat percentage, muscular growth, etc. If you use it daily, Any changes that you see in those numbers are going to honestly only be from water. It's going to be from your hydration levels. In order to lose or gain a pound of body fat, you have to account for 3,500 calories. I want you to think about that for a second. That is almost impossible to do in one 24-hour period. However, it is very reasonable to do in a 7-day period. This is why we encourage people, if you're going to use a scale of any kind, only use it once per week at the most. You can spread that out and use it every couple of weeks or maybe even once a month. But the same parameters that I talked about before still apply. Choose one day of the week, just one. Do it first thing in the morning, after you potty, and make sure you're naked. And that's it for this hot topic. I hope this information was helpful. I know that we don't delve deep into body measurements a lot with the osteo community, and that's okay. However, there is still some really important information that you can get from tracking your body measurements, and I hope that this video helps you understand that. I will see you next week for another hot topic.